In just 14 years, Europe went from being economically larger than the United States to watching America pull dramatically ahead. And thousands of Europeans still don't understand what changed. Keep watching, hit like, and follow now, because the next revelation may completely change how you see America and Europe. What era do you actually think you're living in? If you're European, you probably answer, the modern world. But be careful, because the moment you cross the Atlantic, that confidence can collapse in seconds. For some British travellers, arriving in America doesn't feel like visiting another country at all. It feels like accidentally stepping through a portal into the year 3000. Meanwhile, the moment they think about home, everything suddenly seems painfully old. One traveller even described the United Kingdom as being 100 years behind, joking that Britain had somehow fallen back to 500 BC. And while that sounds ridiculous, listen to the raw reaction, and suddenly the psychological shock becomes much easier to understand. Coming from Britain, America is just crazy. You come here and suddenly you see a completely different perspective of life. People are sitting on porches in the morning. There are basketball hoops everywhere. There are swings hanging from trees, right in people's front yards, like you can just sit there and swing whenever you want. I might even jump on one myself. It's just there. This stuff is crazy. And then you see the American flags. Everywhere you look, there's a USA flag. Literally everywhere. And people have these mailboxes outside their houses too. Instead of walking all the way to the front door and putting the mail through the door, they've got these little boxes sitting out front. Look at that. The UK doesn't have this. What is going on? What's going on? I honestly think the UK is about 100 years behind. We're basically back in 500 BC. Come on. And this psychological shock doesn't stop at porches, basketball hoops, or mailboxes. It begins with something much more basic: the air itself. In Europe, summer can mean struggling with outdated fans while everyone searches desperately for a little shade. In America, air conditioning operates on an entirely different level. Walk into an American store, stadium, or shopping center while it's 35 degrees Celsius outside, and suddenly you're standing inside what feels like an industrial freezer. The contrast is so violent that the first experience can feel less like comfort and more like entering another climate zone. This is roasting, 35 degrees. I've been taking all my pictures outside and I'm thinking, I just need to find some shade. I just want to know what it's going to feel like when I actually walk into the stadium and feel the air conditioning. Oh, this is glorious. Absolutely glorious. It's like stepping into a fridge. Living the dream. I can literally feel myself cooling down. That's what dreams are made of. And then you arrive at a stadium in Dallas expecting football, only to discover something that looks like a miniature city hidden inside a luxury shopping mall. There are major stores, familiar American chains, enormous cooling systems, and enough indoor space to make a European wonder whether the stadium is secretly an entire city. But the real assault on European expectations happens inside the supermarkets. At places such as Wegmans or Target, shopping stops being a simple trip to buy groceries. Suddenly, banking, beauty services, medical services, food, and shopping appear to exist under one enormous roof. It's less like a supermarket and more like someone decided to combine an entire shopping district into one building. Have you ever stood completely stunned in front of an escalator that was designed not for people, but for shopping carts? Because apparently, in America, even the cart refuses to stay behind. Okay, I'm in Philadelphia with my best friends, and they've got this thing. I don't know if it's just a Philly thing, but it's an escalator for the cart. Hang on. Ready? Here it is. There's our cart. It's got all the stuff in it. Ready? There it goes. Oh, there it goes. And now we get to go up the normal escalator, and the cart comes up with us. Tell me that's not the coolest thing ever. You cannot tell me you've ever seen something like this and thought it wasn't cool. People are just doing their shopping like this is completely normal. Ready? Here's the other side. And then it just comes out. Everyone is acting like this is an ordinary part of life. That is not normal. It's amazing. And then you realize it's just Target. That may sound like a tiny convenience, but that's exactly where the culture shock begins to become psychological. Europeans are used to carrying their bags, struggling with plastic bags, finding parking, walking through crowded stores, and accepting these little inconveniences as simply part of life. Americans, meanwhile, casually watch a fully loaded shopping cart travel upward with them as if nothing unusual is happening. No one stops, no one gasps, no one starts filming. It's just another Tuesday. Even the parking lots seem designed to communicate with you. Ceiling-mounted sensors and strategically positioned indicators help drivers find spaces with almost ridiculous precision. And then there are the vending machines at Boston Airport, operating at 4 o'clock in the morning when the shops are closed, ready to serve sandwiches, burgers, and other food without a cashier, waiter, or even a human being standing nearby. It's 4:30 in the morning. I'm at Boston Airport. None of the shops are open. Everything's shut. I'm just walking around getting some steps in, and suddenly I'm looking at all these things on the side. There's a vending machine for Cheesecake Factory. There's a vending machine for breakfast sandwiches. Then there's another one for burgers. Another one. America, honestly. But here's where the European brain experiences what could almost be called post-American depression. The technology isn't even the most shocking part. It's the fact that Americans don't seem impressed by any of it. Nobody is standing there taking photographs. Nobody is staring at the machine like they've discovered alien technology. Nobody appears emotionally damaged by the convenience. They simply use it and continue with their day. That indifference can feel like the final slap in the face. And suddenly, a much bigger question appears. Are Europeans actually protecting their culture, or have they accidentally protected their inconveniences? Did British tourists cross the Atlantic because they wanted to explore America, or did they secretly discover that an air-conditioned store could rescue them from another afternoon of sweating under a fan? Would you rather have a shopping cart escalator carrying everything for you, or spend every weekend carrying a plastic bag filled with milk and potatoes, like a gym workout you never asked for? Because escalators, parking technology, and giant air conditioners are only the outer shell. The real American convenience begins when you realize something even more shocking. You don't even have to leave the driver's seat. In the United States, walking is increasingly becoming a choice rather than a requirement. If the shopping cart escalator already looked unbelievable, prepare yourself. Americans have transformed the automobile into something much larger than transportation. The car has become a mobile command center, and the drive-thru has evolved into an entire ecosystem. A drive-thru ATM. Tell me America doesn't have everything. Make no mistake, the American drive-thru isn't simply about grabbing a greasy burger. It's a philosophy of time. Every minute matters. Every unnecessary step is something that can be eliminated. And for Europeans, this can create a strange mixture of admiration, confusion, envy, and what might reasonably be called American convenience addiction. Think about pharmacies. In England or France, when you're sick, you may have to drag yourself into a cramped shop, stand in line, and share the same tiny indoor space with elderly people, children, and everyone else who happens to be sick. In America, you can stay inside your vehicle, roll down the window, receive your medicine, and drive away. A British traveller admitted that the concept was brilliant, especially when you've got a fussy baby, or simply don't have the strength to stand around waiting. Watch this. Hello, how are you doing today? You good? A little basket. We don't have these in England. I'm obsessed with the convenience of a drive-thru. You don't even have a drive-thru? No, we don't have drive-thrus. Crazy. Convenient. Yeah, it really is. And that's when you realize the drive-thru isn't a single invention. It's a mindset. Do you need cash? There can be a drive-through bank. Need food? Obviously. Need medicine? Of course. Some drive-in cinemas still survive as cultural relics. Even civic activities such as voting have been offered through vehicle-based systems in certain places. And if you thought that was the end of the madness, America keeps going. Drive-through marriage chapels in Las Vegas, blood donation services through your vehicle, and a whole collection of other drive-through concepts that make a European stare at the screen and ask the same question over and over again. Why? The list becomes almost absurd. Pharmacies make sense, especially when you're sick or dealing with sick children. Liquor stores appear on the list, and suddenly the logic becomes harder to understand. Drive-through voting sounds like something from a futuristic comedy. Drive-through wedding chapels sound like Vegas invented them specifically to prove that commitment can happen before the traffic light changes. Drive-in cinemas sound like a memory from the 1990s, yet some still exist. Then there are claims about broccoli dispensers, funeral home drive-thrus, and blood donation drive-thrus that sound so strange you almost wonder whether someone is simply making the story up. But whether every bizarre example is real or not, the underlying obsession is obvious. America keeps searching for another way to remove friction from everyday life. What takes an hour somewhere else can sometimes be compressed into minutes here. And suddenly, a British tourist looking for parking just to withdraw a little cash begins wondering why the process ever had to be complicated in the first place. Americans aren't necessarily lazy. They're obsessed with efficiency. If you can finish something from the driver's seat, why get out? If you can save an hour every week, why waste it standing in a queue? Europeans may spend that time sitting at a sidewalk cafe, watching people pass by. But America seems determined to convert those minutes into productivity. So what happens next? A drive-through dentist? Would you actually open your mouth through the car window while a dentist stands outside holding a drill? Getting married through a drive-through is already fast, but could America eventually invent a press-the-gas divorce service that ends a marriage as quickly as buying a bag of potato chips? And don't dismiss Americans as people who simply refuse to walk. Because once their legs become unnecessary, they take the idea one step further. Eventually, even the car doesn't need you. If you believe robots only belong in Hollywood blockbusters, America is about to ruin that fantasy. The line between science fiction and ordinary life has become so thin that certain American streets can look like the set of a futuristic movie. Think Blade Runner, except nobody is shouting action, because this is apparently just normal life. One of the biggest shocks is Waymo, the self-driving taxi system where you can enter a vehicle and discover there is no human driver sitting behind the wheel. For a European, watching the steering wheel turn by itself can feel like entering a haunted machine. Yet these vehicles navigate real streets, recognize pedestrians, respond to traffic situations, and stop when necessary with an unsettling level of confidence. Guys, I'm literally in a car that's driving itself. It says my initials there, right? This is so mental. Oh my God. Please make sure your seatbelt is fastened. This is so weird.
Is this really cool? Yes. Is it also kind of scary? Also yes.
Oh, it's time for the first turn of the journey. Creepy. We're turning left. There's going to be no jobs left by 2030 at this rate. Cars are driving themselves. There are so many people walking around and driving on the road, acting like this is completely normal. You know what I mean? This is not normal. Now there's a car coming. I'm actually a little shaky. It's a really good driver, though. It's able to pick people up. It's so clever. America is one giant simulation. Why are cars driving themselves? I wonder if this will reach the UK anytime soon. I'm sorry, what actually is this place? What actually is that? I feel like I'm in the year 3000. And then, the robots leave the cars and enter the sidewalks. Delivery robots move around American streets carrying food, waiting for traffic signals, and navigating public spaces as though they belong there. In supermarkets, other robots patrol the aisles looking for spills, trash, or hazards on the floor. Machines can prepare drinks, interact with customers, deliver products, and automate tasks that Europeans still imagine as something reserved for the future. Have you ever seen a bread applicator using a pushrod? Or a giant automated car wash filled with lights, music, and effects that make washing a vehicle feel more like entering a nightclub? This is an American car wash. Look at this. How fancy is that? In so many countries, you don't get all these lights and effects, but an American car wash hits differently. No way. America, they go all out. $40 a month for a subscription, and apparently this guy goes every day. Everything. You get everything done here. Look at that. I almost feel like my whole body is getting clean too. Wow. And then, only a few minutes later, the car comes out shining. We still think of technologies like this as futuristic, but in America, autonomous vehicles, giant automated systems, and even strange-looking machines can become part of ordinary life so quickly that the future arrives without anyone announcing it. Then you see the Cybertrucks. Look at these. It's like a Cybertruck graveyard, isn't it? It's so weird. It feels like some dystopian future. It looks like something from a Kanye West video. They're crazy, aren't they? They just left them sitting there. You could probably rob one. None of them even have license plates. They're completely mental. I don't even know if you can get these in England. I don't think so. I think they're actually banned in England, or maybe banned in Europe. All these cars here. Just give me one. Honestly, I'll take any of them. Just give me one and I'll test it from an English point of view. I'll tell the rest of England whether it's actually any good. I don't mind telling everybody. What really humiliates us isn't simply that Americans have robots. It's how completely normal these machines seem to them. Nobody stops in shock. Nobody pulls out a phone to record every second. Nobody behaves as though they've just witnessed a miracle. They simply walk past and continue living their lives. Meanwhile, European tourists stand there frozen, staring at these machines like children who have just discovered fire. And that difference may be more revealing than the technology itself. Have we become so obsessed with protecting old traditions that we've forgotten the world has already moved forward? If a delivery robot met a perfectly dressed gentleman on the sidewalk, would it actually have to stop and greet him before continuing? And would anyone be nervous enough to sit inside a self-driving taxi that might decide the smell of beer means you're better off being delivered straight to the nearest bar? These robots may look amusing and convenient, but they are only the surface. Beneath them is something much more painful: the economic mathematics exposing Europe's shrinking confidence. Let's turn the clock back to 2008. If you were European at that moment, you had every reason to feel proud. The EU economy had reached roughly $16.2 trillion, larger than the United States at $14.7 trillion. Europe was standing on top of the economic world, and it probably felt as though that position would last forever. But that was the last great moment of superiority. 14 years later, the picture had changed dramatically. The United States had surged to around $25 trillion, while the combined EU and UK economy had reached only about $19.8 trillion. The old continent had spent years watching its growth lose momentum, while its neighbour across the Atlantic accelerated away. So what happened? Why did the economic machine across the ocean become so much more powerful? Look at the recovery after the pandemic. The United States recorded stronger growth, around 2.4%, while Europe struggled closer to 1.2%. America managed what looked like an economic balancing act, a soft landing that controlled inflation without completely destroying growth. Europe, meanwhile, watched major economies such as Germany and the Netherlands slide into decline. The difference isn't simply about intelligence or hard work. It comes down to productivity, investment, and the extraordinary strength of the American financial system. The dollar remains the world's dominant reserve currency, a safe haven investors continue to seek whenever markets become unstable. And American productivity isn't magically higher because Americans possess bigger brains. The explanation is far more practical. American companies invest heavily in capital, technology, equipment, and tools that allow workers to produce more in every hour they work. Europe has fallen behind not only the United States, but also faces pressure from the so-called middle-income trap and rapidly developing economies across Asia. The uncomfortable truth is that Europe's old heritage cannot automatically finance its future. Isn't it strange that the once proud euro increasingly looks upward toward the dollar, like a child staring at an adult? American money seems to generate more money, while European money sometimes appears to be taking an extended summer vacation beside the Mediterranean.
But GDP is ultimately just a number displayed on an electronic screen. The more important question is this: who is actually creating all that wealth? And that's where the comparison becomes even more painful. Try searching for the European equivalents of Google, Amazon, or Microsoft, and the silence can feel deafening. The United States has roughly twice as many companies on the Global 2000 list as Europe has altogether. Some major European businesses, including telecommunications giants such as Orange, can look enormous inside their home market, but become almost invisible once they cross continental borders. America, meanwhile, has dominated the technology sectors that can scale globally at breathtaking speed. Europe is living partly on inheritance. It still celebrates traditional strengths such as engineering, automobiles, mechanics, luxury products, and French fashion. Those industries have enormous histories behind them. But when the digital revolution arrives, and now when artificial intelligence begins transforming entire industries, Europe risks being pushed toward the sidelines. The shortage of startups capable of becoming global unicorns has become one of the deepest scars on European economic confidence. Why can't European startups grow at the same speed? The answer is painfully simple. American investment capital is much deeper, allowing companies to expand at a speed that can feel almost reckless. American corporations act like enormous ships, pulling the rest of the economy forward. Europe simply doesn't have enough truly multinational companies relative to its population and remains overly dependent on financial centers in smaller countries such as Luxembourg and Switzerland. And remember this warning. Without major innovation, Europe risks transforming itself into an open-air museum. A beautiful place where the world travels to admire what humanity created yesterday, rather than a place where people come to discover what humanity will create tomorrow. What a place. What a place. But why do talented minds and enormous pools of investment repeatedly choose New York or Silicon Valley instead of Berlin or Paris? Is it because Europeans are less intelligent? No. The deeper problem is the suffocating maze of rules, markets, taxes, and administrative systems that Europe has built around itself. Imagine you're an investor carrying a huge bag of money, desperately searching for somewhere that money can grow. You look toward America and see something remarkably simple: one giant marketplace. Whether you establish yourself in New York or Texas, people speak the same language, operate under a broadly unified legal framework, and use the world's most powerful reserve currency. It's a single enormous market where a successful company can expand from one coast to another without constantly crashing into completely different national barriers. Then you turn toward Europe. Suddenly, the simple road becomes a labyrinth. Dozens of countries, dozens of languages, different legal systems, different tax structures, different administrative procedures. An investor trying to navigate the overlapping bureaucracy can feel as though someone deliberately designed the maze to make escaping impossible. Expanding a startup from Berlin into Paris can become a dramatically more complicated challenge than expanding a company from one American state into another. This fragmentation acts like a hidden weight tied around European competitiveness, making it much harder for companies to achieve the scale necessary to challenge American technology giants that grew inside one enormous unified market. America's legal environment also tends to accept greater levels of risk and places significant emphasis on protecting innovation. Europe, by comparison, has traditionally built much stronger social safety nets and often approaches economic risk more cautiously. Yet even when we look specifically at labor productivity, the United States maintains an advantage because companies invest more capital and better equipment into each hour of work. America also acts as a magnet for highly skilled workers from around the world, while Europe continues struggling to unify its fragmented energy and services markets. The prediction is brutally simple. As long as America preserves its scale and internal unity, it has an enormous advantage in this economic race.
So ask yourself honestly, would you enjoy investing in Europe if every expansion felt like wandering deeper into a forest filled with taxes, regulations, and bureaucracy? Would you remember why you started trying to make money in the first place? Or would you eventually look across the Atlantic and choose the giant one-stop shop instead? But Europe's biggest vulnerability may not even be bureaucracy. It may be something much more fundamental: dependence. Europeans can proudly talk about centuries of culture, sophisticated infrastructure, and long-standing prosperity. But recent geopolitical shocks exposed just how fragile some of that prosperity could become when the resources supporting it came from somewhere else. The energy crisis at the end of 2022 became the brutal demonstration. At one point, European gas prices surged to around 10 times American levels. The reason is painfully straightforward. Europe had become deeply dependent on Russian energy supplies, which accounted for around 40% of its gas and 25% of its oil imports. The United States, meanwhile, had moved much closer to energy self-sufficiency through the shale revolution, helping keep domestic energy prices comparatively lower and more stable, despite a chaotic global environment. In Europe, energy costs became responsible for roughly half of inflationary pressure, while the figure in America was closer to 20%. That difference doesn't remain trapped inside an economic spreadsheet. It reaches directly into household budgets, factory costs, transportation, and the price of almost everything people buy.